The coffee machine in the corner of the 31st floor made a sound like a small animal in distress every morning, at exactly 6:50, and for 18 months, that sound had been my alarm clock. I'd learned to arrive before it, before the traders on the floor below started their frantic morning calls, before the compliance team filtered in smelling of whatever overpriced dry shampoo was trending that quarter, before Harrison Wolfe materialized from whatever darkness he inhabited between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. I arrived at 6:35, pulled up the Bloomberg terminal, cross-referenced it against the overnight notes from our Tokyo desk, and had his morning briefing printed and flagged before his elevator keycard, registered at the turnstile downstairs. That was what you did when you worked for Harrison Wolfe. You didn't just do your job, you anticipated it. You prevented disasters that hadn't happened yet. You made yourself so necessary that firing you would require essentially dismantling a small, very efficient machine. I'd come close to getting fired exactly once, my third week. I'd sent a meeting confirmation to the wrong Blackstone contact. There were 2 men named Richard Chen at that firm, a fact I'd learned at approximately 8:45 on a Tuesday morning when the wrong one showed up in our lobby, looking confused. Harrison had called me into his office, closed the door with the quiet deliberateness of someone who didn't need to slam things to be frightening, and asked me to explain, not yelled, asked. I told him the truth, including the part where I'd assumed instead of verified. Assumption, he said, is how people lose money in this business, and other things. He'd put me on a week of shadowing our head of operations, a man named Gerald who moved through the firm like a benevolent ghost, knowing everything, visible to no one. After that week, I understood the firm in a way that no orientation packet could have taught me. Harrison never mentioned the incident again. That told me more about him than anything else had. 18 months later, I knew which vendor made his lunch order late on Fridays. I knew the precise angle at which he preferred the blinds adjusted when afternoon sun hit the west-facing glass. I knew that he took his coffee black until 2 p.m., and after that only water, because he'd read somewhere that caffeine after noon disrupted his sleep architecture, and he'd filed that fact away, with the same seriousness he applied to interest rate projections. I knew he hadn't slept well the previous night, because he'd been in the office at 5:42 a.m. when I arrived, which had never happened before. He was standing at the window with his jacket still on, looking out at a city that was barely awake, and he didn't hear me come in. I set his coffee on the corner of my desk, his cup, the white ceramic one, not the paper cups everyone else used, and made enough noise organizing the morning folders that he'd have time to register my presence without being startled. He turned. "You're early, so are you," I said, and then immediately wondered if I'd overstepped. Pointing out his irregularity felt presumptuous, but he just nodded, something moving behind his eyes that I couldn't name. The Ashford filing came through at 4 a.m. I wanted to be here when the London desk opened. It's on your desk. Top folder, green tab. I flagged the 3 clauses that conflict with the SEC amendments from last month. He looked at me for a moment. "When did you pull the filing?" "I have alerts set for anything tagged to current active deals." It came through at 4:06. I read it at 6:15. Another pause, not uncomfortable. Harrison Wolfe's silences were never uncomfortable exactly. They were just full, like he was doing math you couldn't see. "Come in," he said, and turned back toward his office. "Walk me through your read on Clause 9. That was a Tuesday. It's the Tuesday I think about when I try to pinpoint the moment everything shifted. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because it was the first time I noticed that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Somewhere in 18 months, the man who'd made me feel like a liability on my 3rd week had become the person I was most fluent in. That should have been a warning sign. The flowers arrived on a Wednesday. I was reconciling travel expense reports. Harrison had been in London for 4 days the previous week, and the hotel had charged for a minibar neither of us believed he'd used. When the lobby desk called up to tell me there was a delivery. "Flowers," the security guard said, with the slightly uncertain tone of someone who found this information incongruous with the 31st floor's general atmosphere. "For you, Miss Calloway." I didn't correct him on the pronunciation. I also didn't know what to make of the delivery, because I hadn't ordered anything, wasn't expecting anything, and couldn't think of a single person in my life who would send flowers to my workplace. My mother sent edible arrangements. My college roommate texted memes. My last relationship had ended 14 months ago, with a mutually exhausted shrug and a Venmo request for the remaining half of a concert ticket. I told the guard I'd come down at lunch. When I got back to my desk with a bouquet that was, objectively, embarrassing in its extravagance, white peonies, garden roses, eucalyptus, the kind of arrangement that cost more than my first New York apartment's monthly utilities, Harrison was standing in the doorway of his office. He looked at the flowers the way he looked at quarterly reports that contained surprises he didn't like. Specifically, carefully. Someone sent those to you here. It wasn't a question, apparently. I set them on the corner of my desk, feeling oddly self-conscious. There wasn't a card. There's always a card. He crossed the space between us in 4 steps and lifted the arrangement slightly, checking underneath, then parted the stems with 2 fingers until he found it. A small cream envelope, tucked deep. He held it out to me without reading it. I opened it. The handwriting was formal, almost architectural, for the woman who makes every room quieter and every problem smaller. T. I read it twice, then set it down. I have no idea who this is. Harrison's jaw did something, a slight tightening. He looked at the card again, then at me, and his expression had gone careful in a way I recognized. The way he looked when he was deciding how much to say. Put them in the conference room, he said finally. They'll distract you. They're on the corner of my desk. They won't. Conference room. He went back into his office and closed the door. The afternoon was strange. Harrison called me in twice for things that could have been handled by email. During the second visit, ostensibly to discuss the Ashford merger timeline, I caught him looking at the empty corner of my desk where the flowers had been, and then looking away quickly when he realized I'd noticed. My phone buzzed at 5:45. Unknown number. I hope the flowers weren't too forward. I've been working up to this for a while. Coffee sometime? Theo. I stared at the message. Theo. I knew exactly 3 people named Theo, and none of them had my work number. I was still staring at it when Harrison appeared at my desk, coat on, the posture of a man who was about to say goodnight but had stopped himself. You should have security log that delivery, he said, nodding at my phone as if he could see the message. He couldn't. But something about my expression had apparently communicated something. Anonymous gifts sent to employees are a liability. It wasn't anonymous. It was signed. By someone who didn't identify themselves sufficiently. He paused. Have you ever received anything like this before? At the office? No. Then it warrants attention. His voice was level, professional. Forward anything unusual to me. I'll have our security team look into it. I almost said that's not necessary. I almost said it's probably just someone I met somewhere. I'll figure it out. But there was something in the deliberateness of his posture, the specific quality of stillness that meant he was containing something, that made me just nod. Good night, Mr. Wolf. He left. I sat at my desk for another 20 minutes, looking at the message from Theo, and thinking about the way Harrison's jaw had moved when he saw the flowers. I didn't text back. Not yet. He found me the next morning at the coffee machine, the distressed animal one, waiting for it to finish its morning performance. I looked into the delivery, Harrison said, from approximately 2 feet behind me, which was closer than he usually stood. I turned. Good morning to you too. Something almost like amusement crossed his face. Almost. The florist on Lexington. High-end appointment only. Delivery logged to a corporate account under the name Theo Ashford. The coffee machine finished its sound. I didn't move to pour. Ashford, I repeated. As in the Ashford merger. As in the 28-year-old son of the family selling the company. Harrison's voice had gone to that place it went during negotiations. Precise and stripped of everything unnecessary. Theo Ashford has been present at 3 of the last 4 preliminary meetings. You managed the room for all 3. I thought back. A younger man in a navy suit, quieter than the others, who'd asked for water when everyone else wanted coffee, and had thanked me by name when I brought it. I'd clocked him as polite and forgotten him immediately, because my job during those meetings was to be invisible. He noticed you, Harrison said. I should have anticipated that. There was something strange about the way he said it. I should have anticipated that. Not you should have been more careful, or this is a conflict of interest issue. The failure, in his framing, was his. It's not a problem, I said. I'll handle it. How? I'll tell him I don't mix professional and personal. It's simple." Harrison looked at me. He had a way of looking at people that made you feel like he was reading text you hadn't written yet. "Theo Ashford is not going to accept a polite decline, Waverly." He used my first name. In 18 months, he had called me Ms. Calloway approximately 900 times. I was so startled that I almost missed what he said next. "His family is finalizing a $240 million transaction with this firm. He has every reason to use that leverage, consciously or not, to make himself difficult to refuse. And I have every reason to be concerned about what he might say to you at dinner." He paused. "What he might ask." I set down my coffee cup. "You think he's going to try to get information about the deal?" "I think a 28-year-old who is not centrally involved in the sale of his family's company is unusually interested in my executive assistant. I think timing matters." His expression didn't change, but something in it deepened. "And I think I should have seen this coming 3 meetings ago." There was that framing again, his failure, his oversight. "You can't predict everything," I said. "I try to." He picked up his coffee and turned toward his office. "Don't respond to his message yet. Come see me at 9. At 9, he laid out what he knew. Theo Ashford was the youngest of 3 siblings, the only one not directly involved in the family's investment banking business. He'd spent 2 years in private equity, left after 18 months, and had been floating since then in the comfortable orbit of family money and accumulated connections. He wasn't incompetent. He was, in Harrison's assessment, someone who had learned that charm was more useful than competence in most rooms. "He's been at this firm's preliminary meetings as an observer," Harrison said. "His father requested it, some notion of letting him see how the deal process works. In that context, he has access to enough general information to be dangerous, and enough peripheral involvement to make any conversation with you feel plausibly innocent. So what do you want me to do?" He looked at me across his desk. The morning light was doing something to the room, making everything feel more specific than usual. "I want you to not be alone with him." I blinked. "That's your plan?" I want you to tell him you're willing to meet once. Coffee, public place, brief. See what he actually wants." Harrison's voice was even. "And I want you to tell me everything he says. You want me to report back. I want to know if this is what I think it is." I sat with that for a moment. Harrison Wolfe had run this firm's M&A division for 11 years. He had a reputation that preceded him into every room he entered, and not always gently. He was not a man who asked things without reasons, and he was not a man whose reasons were ever small. "What do you think it is?" I asked. A problem I should have prevented. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Meet him once, somewhere public, and Waverly." He stopped. "What?" "Be careful." The 2 words landed differently than anything else he'd said. Not professionally, just carefully. I met Theo Ashford for coffee on a Thursday afternoon at a place on 5th that had good lighting and enough ambient noise to make eavesdropping difficult. He was already there when I arrived, easy in his chair, in the way of someone who'd never had to arrive first to anything. He was attractive. I registered this the way I registered most things, factually, without excessive interest. Dark hair, an easy smile, clothes that cost more than they looked like they cost, which was itself a kind of sophistication. "You came," he said, like I'd done something braver than getting on the subway. "You sent flowers to my office," I said, sitting down. "I was curious." He laughed, genuine amusement. "Fair. I wasn't sure that was the right move. My sister told me it was either charming or a lot." "It was a lot," I said, "but I'm here so." He ordered for both of us without asking, which I noted but let pass. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The neighborhood, the city, a museum exhibition he'd seen last weekend, and I found myself genuinely calibrating. He was good at this. He made conversation feel like a gift he was giving you rather than a performance he was delivering. Then he said, "You must see a lot working for Harrison Wolfe." I kept my expression pleasantly neutral. "I see a lot of scheduling conflicts and expense reports." He smiled. "Come on. He's one of the most significant deal makers in the city. You're with him every day. You must have opinions. I'm very good at not having opinions about my employer. That's a diplomatic answer." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm just curious about him. My family's in the middle of a major transaction with his firm, and honestly, from where I sit, the man is a complete black box. I can't get a read on him. Most people can't. I said truthfully. But you can. I looked at him. He was still smiling, still warm, still doing everything right, and I thought about Harrison's voice saying, I think I should have seen this coming. I thought about the specific way his jaw had moved when he saw those flowers. I think, I said slowly, that you're asking me something that sounds personal but is actually professional. Theo's smile didn't disappear. It just settled. Like a mask finding its resting position. I'm asking because I like you. You liked that I brought you water and remembered your name at 3 meetings you weren't supposed to be central to. I kept my voice light, which is flattering. But I also think your family is nervous about this deal, and you've decided I might be a useful source of information, and this is a more comfortable approach than going through official channels. The silence that followed was brief. Then he exhaled, and his expression shifted into something less polished and more real. You're perceptive. I work for a very demanding person. It develops fast. It's not entirely calculated, he said. I genuinely find you interesting. But you're right that I'm also worried. My father wants this deal. My siblings want this deal. I'm the only one asking whether Wolf's firm is actually the right partner long-term, and nobody will give me a straight answer. He looked at me directly. I thought maybe you could. I sat with that. He was telling me something true. I could feel it. Not the whole truth, but a real piece of it. The younger sibling in a powerful family, skeptical and sidelined and trying to find leverage where he could. I can't tell you anything about firm strategy or deal terms, I said. You know that. I know. But what's he like? As a person? Is he someone you'd trust? And there it was, wrapped in genuine question but pointed at something specific. I stood, picking up my bag. He's the most trustworthy person I've ever worked for, I said, and meant every word of it. And I think if you have real concerns about the deal, you should raise them with your father directly, instead of trying to triangulate through his assistant. Theo looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded, almost respectfully. You're going to tell him about this conversation. I'm going to tell him everything, I confirmed. Because that's my job, and because I think transparency is better for everyone involved, including you. I called Harrison from the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been waiting. He was fishing, I said. Not aggressively, but deliberately. He's worried the deal isn't right for his family, and he thought I might be a shortcut to information. Silence. Then, are you all right? I stopped walking. Of everything I'd expected him to say, that wasn't it. I'm fine, I said. He wasn't threatening. Just strategic. Come back to the office. A pause, please. Another word I wasn't used to from him. I went back to the office. He was standing at his window when I got there, which was becoming a pattern, Harrison at the glass, looking at a city that had no idea it was being managed. He turned when I came in, and I could see the particular tension in his shoulders. That meant he'd been waiting in a state of controlled worry. I told him everything. Every word, including Theo's genuine concern about his family's position, which I thought was real even within the manipulation. Harrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. You handled it exactly right. It wasn't hard. He's not subtle if you know what to look for. Most people don't know what to look for. He looked at me. You do. Something about the way he said it. I pushed past it. What are you going to do about the deal? I'm going to call Robert Ashford this afternoon and tell him his son has concerns worth addressing. He moved from the window. Theo was right to be cautious. If he'd raised his questions through normal channels, he would have gotten real answers. Instead, he paused. Instead, he sent my assistant flowers. I couldn't quite help myself. You're bothered by that. Harrison looked at me. A long, specific look. Yes, because of the conflict of interest. He didn't answer immediately. He moved around the desk, and then stopped, hands flat on the surface, looking at a point somewhere between us. When I saw those flowers on your desk, he said, my first thought was not about the conflict of interest. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when something has shifted and you both know it. What was your first thought? I asked. His jaw moved. I'd learned every version of that jaw movement in 18 months. This one was new. This one was something he was deciding whether to allow himself. That someone had been watching you, he said. And that I hadn't been watching closely enough. I sat down. Not because I needed to, but because my legs suggested it would be wise. Harrison, don't. His voice was very even. Don't tell me it's not professional, I know that. I've known that for considerably longer than you probably think. He still wasn't looking at me directly. I've also known that the solution was distance, because I don't involve myself personally with people who work for me. And I don't make decisions that compromise my judgment. And for 18 months, those two convictions kept everything exactly where it should be. And then someone sent me flowers, I said. And then someone sent you flowers. Something crossed his face. And I stood in my office this morning rerunning 3 months of meeting notes, looking for the moment I should have flagged Theo Ashford as a risk, and what I realized was that I wasn't doing it out of due diligence. I was doing it because the thought of you sitting across from him at a coffee shop. He stopped, pressed his mouth together. You were jealous, I said. The word sat between us. He didn't deny it. He also didn't say it back, but the silence had the shape of an agreement. This is a problem, he said. I know. You work for me. I'm aware. If this becomes... He stopped again, started over. I've kept things exactly as they were because the alternative requires honesty, and honesty in this context opens doors that are difficult to close if they don't work. I looked at him. Harrison Wolfe, who had 11 years of reputation and a face that could stare down a boardroom without blinking, was standing at his own desk telling me he was afraid. Not of Theo Ashford, not of the merger falling through, of this. Of whatever was in this room right now. I'm not going anywhere, I said. He looked at me then, really looked. If it doesn't work, I said, I'll find another job. I'm good at what I do. I'll be fine. I paused. But I don't think it won't work. You can't know that. You've told me assumption is the enemy of precision, you're right. But I'm not assuming. I stood up. I'm making an informed assessment based on 18 months of data. Something happened to his expression. The wall didn't come down. It was more like a door opened in it, just slightly, just enough. 18 months, he repeated. You've been watching me that whole time, I said. I've been watching you too. The Ashford deal closed 3 weeks later. Theo Ashford, to his credit, had taken my advice. He'd gone to his father directly, raised his concerns through proper channels, and gotten the answers he needed. The deal terms were adjusted slightly to address the family's long-term partnership questions. Harrison told me Robert Ashford had called it the smoothest resolution of a late-stage concern he'd seen in 30 years. Theo sent me a text the evening after closing. You were right. Thanks for being straight with me. For what it's worth, he's lucky to have you. I showed it to Harrison. He read it once, handed my phone back, and said nothing. But the corner of his mouth did a thing. The thing about working for someone like Harrison Wolfe is that the line between professional and personal doesn't shift all at once. It moves by increments so small, you don't notice until you're standing somewhere entirely different from where you started. It moved the evening he found me in the small kitchen at the end of the floor at 8:30, eating leftover salad from lunch because I'd worked through dinner, and he sat down across from me at the small table no one ever used and ate a granola bar in silence like it was normal for us to do this. It moved the morning he brought me coffee, his ceramic cup at his desk, mine in a paper cup on the corner of mine, and I realized he'd remembered exactly how I took it. It moved the afternoon I caught him in my peripheral vision, while I was on a call, standing at his office door, watching me work with an expression he didn't have time to arrange before I turned. He'd told me the truth that day in his office, and then we'd both gone back to our jobs, because that was what we were. People who were good at their jobs, who didn't let things that mattered compromise things that also mattered. But the truth had changed the room. The truth had changed everything slightly, the way a single adjusted thermostat changes the entire feel of a space. 3 months after the Ashford deal, he asked me to dinner. Not in the office. He called my cell on a Saturday morning, which he'd done exactly twice before, and both times involved international travel emergencies. I answered already calculating the time zones. There's a restaurant in the West Village, he said. Thursday, 7 o'clock, a beat. Are you asking me to dinner? I said. Yes, as my boss? No. I was quiet for a moment. Outside my apartment window, the city was doing its Saturday thing. Kids on bikes, someone playing music from a stoop, the ambient noise of 12 million people living their lives. Okay, I said. Okay, he repeated. Then, after a pause that felt very Harrison, I'll make the reservation. I laughed. You already made the reservation. I made it provisionally. Something in his voice shifted. I wasn't certain you'd say yes. You track every risk variable on a $200 million deal, but you weren't sure about this. Those are, he said, considerably easier to model. I wore a dress I'd bought on a Saturday in October and never had occasion to wear. I arrived 2 minutes early. He was already there, which meant he'd arrived at least 5 minutes early, which meant Harrison, Wolf, had been nervous. We talked for 3 hours, not about the firm, not about deals, not about anything I could have predicted. He told me about growing up in Pittsburgh, about a father who'd built a business from nothing, and a mother who'd made sure all 3 kids understood what nothing actually meant. He told me about a professor in his MBA program who'd told him he was the most analytically precise student he'd ever taught, and also the least aware of what other people were feeling, and how Harrison had gone home and spent a weekend thinking about whether that was true. Was it? I asked. At the time, yes, he said. I've worked on it since. Successfully, he looked at me across the table. I noticed you, he said simply, that first week, not because you made a mistake. Before that, I'd spent 18 months being fluent in Harrison Wolf, learning every variation of his silences and his expressions, and his particular brand of controlled everything. I thought I'd catalogued all of it. I hadn't catalogued this. This version of him, slightly undone, not performing certainty, was new, and it was the most interesting thing I'd seen in a long time. What did you notice? I asked. That you were afraid and didn't show it, he said. 3rd day. You were handling a call that wasn't going well, and your voice was completely steady, but you were pressing your thumb against your forefinger under the desk. You do that when something's harder than you're letting on. He paused. I noticed because I do the same thing. I looked down at my hands, flat on the table. I made myself keep them there. You've been watching me for 18 months, I said. Yes, that's a long time to watch someone and not say anything. I had reasons. Were they good ones? He considered this with the genuine seriousness he applied to everything. They were valid, he said finally. I'm not certain they were good. We walked back across the village after dinner, because neither of us wanted to end the night in a cab, and the city was doing that thing it does in spring, where it feels almost unreasonably alive. He didn't take my hand, but he walked close enough that I could feel the warmth of his arm against mine, and at a corner where we waited for the light, he said my name. Waverly. Yeah, I want to be careful with this. He was looking at the street, not at me, with you. I have a tendency to manage things, to approach situations as problems to be solved rather than, he stopped, rather than experiences to actually have, I said. Yes. He looked at me then. I'm trying not to do that. I know, I said. I've watched you try for 18 months. The light changed, we crossed. On the other side, he did take my hand. Briefly, but deliberately. The way he did everything. It wasn't a fairy tale. Harrison Wolf was exacting and occasionally frustrating, and had a habit of sending emails at 5:45 in the morning, as if that were a normal time for human communication. He had opinions about everything, and didn't always volunteer them until you'd already made a decision, which he would then quietly and precisely explain could have been better. He struggled with the concept of weekends as rest rather than unmarked work time. I was not without my own complications. I had a perfectionist streak that occasionally tipped into rigidity. I processed things slowly and privately, which sometimes read as distance. I had a habit of solving problems for people who hadn't asked me to, which Harrison found alternately useful and maddening. We were, in other words, 2 very specific people trying to figure out how to occupy the same space without the structure of professional necessity holding everything in its assigned place. There were difficult months. There was a period where I wasn't sure if what we had outside the office was strong enough to withstand how much we'd built inside it. Whether the relationship we'd constructed through work was actually a foundation or just a very sophisticated scaffolding. I almost left. Not the relationship, the job. I'd been approached by another firm, a good one, a role that would have been a genuine step forward. I told Harrison about it on a Tuesday evening in his apartment, which had stopped feeling like his apartment and started feeling like a place where I also lived, and I watched his face do what it did when he was calculating the distance between what he felt and what he thought he should say. Is this what you want? He asked. I want to know what you think. I think, he said carefully, that you're one of the best people I've ever worked with, and that you are professionally outgrowing a role that was built around managing my life, and that I've known this for about 4 months and been avoiding the conversation because I didn't want to think about what it meant. I hadn't expected that kind of honesty. After everything, I still sometimes forgot what he was capable of when he let himself be. "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means I want you to take the job," he said, "and it means I want you to stop working for me so that we stop having to calculate every professional decision against this." He gestured between us, "so that what we are is just what we are." I took the job. It was strange at first, the recalibration. I'd oriented myself around his schedule for so long that my mornings felt structureless, which was ridiculous but true. He adapted too. No longer my employer. He had to find new ways to be the person I knew him as, the one who wasn't performing authority at me. He was better at it than I expected. I think he was relieved, actually, to be able to stop performing. We were in his kitchen on a Sunday in November, my second year at the new firm, 14 months after I'd left his, when he said, without preamble, the way he said most important things, "I'd like to marry you." I was making coffee. I set down the cup. "Would you?" I said. "I've been thinking about it for some time." He was sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug, watching me with that look I now knew. Meant he wasn't sure how the variable would resolve, but had decided to run the calculation anyway. I wanted to say it plainly rather than orchestrate an elaborate proposal. "I don't do elaborate," he said. "I do honest." I crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him. The coffee machine made its animal noise in the background. I thought about 6:30 in the morning on the 31st floor, the specific quality of those early silences, two people learning each other in the most precise and least straightforward way imaginable. "I'd like that too," I said. He reached across the table and took my hand, deliberate, the way he did everything. "Good," he said. And I knew, in the way you know things you've been quietly certain of for much longer than you've said them out loud, that this was where the long, complicated, entirely worth it story had been going all along.